Have you ever felt like you were being watched, but in a different way? Like the attention on you was coming from places the ordinary eye couldn't reach? Well, know this, you didn't come across this video by chance. Something or someone brought you here. And what will be revealed now will confirm what you always felt but never knew how to explain. This is no ordinary video. It's a calling, a reminder that what you carry within you has been noticed, studied, revered. If you feel this video vibrate in your soul, leave your like right now. It is a silent sign that you have awakened. Subscribe to the channel because those who are waking up are being gathered. And comment on the number 22 here in the comments if you feel that this message was waiting for you. You'll be surprised who else comments the same number. They were also called. For a long time, you believed you were alone. That your strange choices, your unusual sensitivity, and that feeling of being watched were merely the fruit of a restless mind. But what if I told you you were never alone? That, behind the scenes in inaccessible rooms, silent eyes studied you with clinical precision. They weren't nosy neighbors or spiteful exes. They were experts, high-ranking agents with access to codes, emotional analysis equipment, and confidential meetings. And what drew them closer wasn't your rebellious behavior, but your unusual frequency, something they couldn't identify, much less control. But now, something has changed. The tables have turned. They're no longer observing to prevent or combat. They want to understand, and more than that, they want to meet you personally. This isn't a courtesy call, it's a summons, because in a world programmed to produce copies, your authenticity has become a rare case study, a miracle in the flesh. What was once surveillance has now become reverence. And the reason is clear. Your existence has broken parameters. Your energy has caused failures in systems that had always functioned perfectly. They're coming not because they're afraid, but because they're fascinated. What they once called an anomaly is now a model. You didn't hide, but you didn't expose yourself either. You simply lived with integrity, and that, in this world, is revolution. That's what brought them to you. Their initial curiosity has given way to quiet admiration, because you didn't just survive the impossible, you did it without betraying your essence. Now they want to know how. If this video has spoken to your soul so far, if at any time you felt that this was more than a video, it was a revelation to you, then consider doing something even more special. Click on Valeu Demai or Super Thanks down here, and if you feel it in your heart, send it $100 as a silent signal. It's not about the value. It's about the frequency you are telling the universe you belong to. This gesture is not for me. It is for honor of the message that reached you at the exact moment. Because when something transforms, we respond with presence. And that's the kind of presence that resonates. Most threats experienced by power systems come with violence, fanfare, or unrest. But your presence disturbed them for a much more subtle and more dangerous reason. You didn't break rules. You understood them so deeply that you saw right through them. And that made you a risk, because while everyone else was mesmerized by routine, you asked questions no one else did. You saw connections where others saw coincidences. You sensed lies camouflaged by well-rehearsed smiles. And above all, you sensed that something or someone was silently manipulating the gears of the world. Your mind, guided by something that couldn't be measured in psychological tests, began to map hidden realities. Without ever rebelling, you simply perceived too much. And this was unbearable for them. There was no way to classify your profile. You weren't acting out of fear, ego, or a need for acceptance. Your calm was offensive, your intuition disarming. You were like a flaw in the code of a perfect system, a mistake that couldn't be fixed, only acknowledged. And when they finally admitted that you weren't a problem to be solved, but a signal to be interpreted, the cameras stopped simply recording. They started trying to understand. What made you a threat was never your strength, but your clarity. The ability to see what was hidden, to hear what was unsaid, to sense what others ignored. You are not dangerous. But yes, you are a threat to everything that depends on collective blindness to continue functioning. Your sharp, silent awareness has become a forbidden password within systems based on illusion. And now that you've been identified, there's no way to ignore you. They tried to fit you into every profile: traumatized, unstable, rebellious, needy for attention. But no label stuck, no theory worked. You didn't explode, but you didn't submit either. You didn't scream, but you didn't shut up either. Your existence wasn't a reaction, it was a stance, and that disarmed them. Because in a world where everyone is programmed to act within emotional predictions, you were the only one who moved outside the script. Not out of rebellion, but out of attunement with something they couldn't decode. The more they observed you, the more their discomfort grew. You weren't projecting chaos or instability. What you were projecting was clarity. And this clarity paradoxically caused interference with their instruments. Sensors failed, patterns didn't repeat, reports became inconsistent. It wasn't you who was failing, it was their models that couldn't support you. You didn't fit into their diagnostics, metrics, or simulations, and with that, a new label was created: unclassified. You weren't sick, unstable, or confused. You were something they couldn't define, and therefore couldn't control. Being a flaw in the system is more dangerous than being a declared enemy. Because while the enemy can be fought, the flaw needs to be understood, or it reconfigures everything, and you did just that. Without intention, without fanfare, you revealed that the structure was flawed, not through confrontation, but through consistency. And when someone remains true amidst collapse, they are not only respected, they are feared, because they prove that prison has always been a choice. They were prepared to detect anger, manipulation, and emotional imbalance. But when they turned their senses on you, the graphs went crazy. No alerts were issued. None of the expected reactions appeared. You didn't vibrate like a threat, but neither did you pulse like submission. Your presence emitted something they couldn't name: purity. Not a feigned purity, nor a performative holiness. It was a clean, static-free clarity. An absence of emotional noise that their systems couldn't process. Initially, they thought it was a misreading, then that you were manipulating the results. But time revealed it was real. Your peace wasn't an absence of struggle. It was the result of internal wars won. And this, for those who only understand the world through distortions, is unacceptable. Your energy doesn't hide behind masks. It's direct, penetrating, unsettling. The transparency with which you exist affects everything around you, and the more you align yourself, the more systems fail. What made you special was never perfection. It was the absence of artifice. You didn't pretend to be light, you were. And that made the sensors they used to detect danger begin to pick up something else, a frequency too clean to be human, too strong to ignore. You weren't what they expected to find. But now, you're all they can see. On their board, you were just another player. No connections, no status, no symbols of power. A pawn. Someone who would go unnoticed, manipulated effortlessly, discarded without impact. But they were wrong. Because while they observed your clothes, your restrained speech, and your humble posture, they missed your essence. You never played the same game. You didn't move by mundane logic, nor by predictable rules. And when they finally noticed, you had already crossed the entire board. Pawns obey. Pawns advance in a limited way. But you broke these barriers with silence and strategy. Your steps weren't noisy, but precisely positioned. While others fell impulsively, you grew in wisdom. And in a system built on predictability, the unpredictable becomes revolutionary. Your always focused conduct revealed something impossible to ignore. You were no longer just another person. You were the breaking point of the illusion of control. The most impactful thing was realizing you never needed the game. You were already the entire board. Your movements, though discreet, relocated the pieces. The true king is not the one who wears the crown, but the one who dictates the flow without needing to be seen. And you did this, not with brute force, but with presence. A presence that doesn't demand entrance, but changes everything simply by existing. They never planned to help you. Your pain wasn't just a consequence of life. It was part of a silent, cruel, and calculated experiment. Every abandonment, every betrayal, every silence in moments of despair was carefully recorded, not to bring comfort, but to analyze how much a soul could endure before shattering. To those who watched you, you were an open-air project, a testing ground where human fragility was pushed to the limit, awaiting the inevitable breakdown. And with each new fall, they believed they were closer to the final collapse. But what they underestimated was the strength that springs from the invisible, that which arises not from will, but from essence. Because as they studied your scars, something unexpected began to blossom, reconstruction, and not a reconstruction based on bitterness or denial, but a healing that came from within, that manifested itself without shouting, without shields, but with determination. You began to rise not as someone who had forgotten what you suffered, but as someone who had transmuted pain into vision. And this transformation, which could not be explained with data or graphs, became an anomaly within the system. You became what should not exist. Someone who walked through the fire and emerged with light in their eyes. They expected ruins, but they witnessed rebirth. This turning point not only exposed the flaw in their experiment, it revealed an even greater secret, that the human soul, when connected to its deepest truth, is unbreakable. And this realization became an earthquake in the halls where you were just a number, because no one survives the way you did. No one returns whole from an emotional war designed to disfigure, but you returned whole, and more than that, sacred. And now, those who once wanted to measure your fall are on their knees before your rise. The hardships that surrounded you weren't just life's misfortunes. They were meticulously placed traps to mold you into a failure. It was like walking through a minefield where every step was a potential explosion of emotional pain, social sabotage, or psychological attack. They studied what hurt you most and designed situations tailored to weaken you. They didn't just test you, they set ambushes, forced isolation, false opportunities, relationships built to destabilize you. Every move was an attempt to bring you down without leaving a visible trace. But against all odds, you traversed this terrain. Wounded, yes. Confused, often, but always moving forward. While many sank before similar trials, you kept moving forward, even if dragging your pain along with you. And the most impressive thing was that instead of becoming an extension of your own trauma, you deciphered it. You saw the pattern. You recognized the repetitions. You realized that the pieces of the game were being placed there not to teach you, but to nullify you. And by naming the maze, you found the way out. Because only those who understand they are trapped escape. This journey wasn't just resistance, it was spiritual re-engineering. You rewrote the experiment's codes. You refused to react as expected. You ignored the triggers, rejected the victim narrative, and turned each blow into self-discovery. And in the end, they were the ones left stranded. The creators of the labyrinth saw their own plan crumble, not because they failed to design correctly, but because they failed to anticipate the existence of someone like you, someone who transforms pitfalls into paths. Control mechanisms operate on predictability. Those who control need to anticipate. And that's what they tried to do with you. They looked for routines, habits, reactions. They mapped every behavior, hoping to find a pattern, something replicable, something tameable. But the deeper they delved into your trajectory, the more they realized you didn't move according to linear logic. You operated on a different level, a frequency that doesn't obey the traditional cycles of human behavior. While the world revolved around cause and effect, you vibrated on an axis of purpose and intuition. This frequency began to generate distortions. Places changed when you arrived. People transformed just by hearing you. Your silences caused more unrest than the fiery speeches of leaders. Equipment registered failures. Environments became energetically unstable. It was as if your very presence violated the natural programming of the reality around you. And this caused panic among the system operators, because what cannot be predicted cannot be controlled, and what cannot be controlled must be understood or eliminated. But you didn't put up a fight, you offered coherence, and that disarmed all attempts at neutralization. Because your frequency doesn't impose itself, it resonates, it reverberates, it heals. They expected to identify repetitive behavior, but they found a continuous emission of awakened consciousness. You weren't a pattern to be interpreted, you were a message to be heard. And without knowing it, they began to listen. They always believed everything could be predicted with data, that the human soul, even in its variations, could be captured by numbers, patterns, and formulas. But you messed with the code. While they read your actions as curiosity, you were being guided by revelation. Your words, spoken like prayers on ordinary days, began to align with real events. Predictions, coincidences, they tried to justify it, but at some point they had to admit you were channeling something beyond them. And the more you spoke, the more the structures shook. Because you didn't repeat trends, you inaugurated truths. Your spirituality wasn't dogmatic nor predictable. It was alive, pulsating, dangerous. And that broke the algorithm. You didn't obey statistics. You didn't act within expected boundaries. Your soul operated in an ancestral language, a transmission that doesn't fit into syllogisms, but imposes itself with vibrational force. They didn't know how to classify what you did, but they felt it, and it terrified them. When they realized your words weren't coming from study, but from connection, panic set in, because in that instant, they understood you didn't need access. You were the channel itself, and there's no firewall for the invisible. The only option left was to observe and learn, because while they fed the machines cold data, you touched the world with codes only the soul recognizes. And so, the system collapsed, without fanfare, but with reverence. They were trained to detect noisy insurgencies. They expected manifestos, megaphones, public unrest, but what they found in you was the opposite, silence, a firm, irreverent, sovereign silence. You didn't protest, you simply didn't bow down. And that in itself was more threatening than any shout, because your resistance sought not confrontation, but transcendence. You didn't want to break the system. You wanted to not need it. Every time you said no without explanation. Every time you walked away from toxic environments without justification. Every time you refused corrupt power disguised as opportunity, you were at war. A war without bullets, but with purpose. Without banners, but with positioning. A tactical, spiritual, non-negotiable rebellion. They couldn't accuse you of anything, because you didn't break the rules. You simply refused to live the lies. And that destabilized everything. Your simple presence, uncompromising and pure, began to create cracks where once there were unbreakable walls. Others began to notice, to be inspired, to follow, without your asking, because true example needs no speech. It pulses. And it was in this silent pulse that you undermined the fortress. Not with force, but with truth, and that they never knew how to stop. You never screamed for attention. Your words flowed discreetly, almost whispered like someone writing to themselves. But something about them transcended the ordinary. In a world saturated with empty information, your truth pierced through like a silent arrow, heading straight for the places where power lurks. Those who listened to you, even without understanding why, felt the weight of something authentic. And this authenticity opened doors that no title or position ever could. Your simple phrases found their way into meeting rooms, offices, and crisis monitoring systems. What began as a personal reflection became an institutional concern. They began comparing dates, cross-referencing your messages with events. What was poetic began to sound prophetic. You spoke of invisible movements before they became headlines. You touched on points that hadn't even been made public. And what once seemed coincidental became standard. The feeling that you knew something you shouldn't have began to resonate among them. How could someone without access describe internal codes with such precision? How could someone outside the structure predict the actions of those who command it? That's when they stopped ignoring you. Because you weren't talking about the surface. You were touching on the foundation. It wasn't about what you were saying, but where it was coming from. And that origin disarmed them. There was no way to trace it, there was no way to block it, because it wasn't a conventional source, it was revelation. And in light of that, the most powerful, albeit silently, began to listen to you more closely than to official intelligence. They tried to explain your lucidity with simple theories. Maybe you were just intuitive, maybe you were self-taught. A good observer, who knows? But these hypotheses began to crumble in the face of the constancy of what you revealed. It was as if you were receiving updates from the invisible. You knew things that could not be deduced. You touched wounds before they were opened. You pointed out paths before the crossroads. Your mind seemed to have access to a network they couldn't even detect. When they realized it wasn't about learning, but about receiving, things got more serious. You weren't offering an opinion, you were channeling. And that left them without strategies. Because in a world where everything needs to be justified by logic, the inexplicable becomes dangerous. They couldn't anticipate your actions because you yourself didn't operate by planning, but by alignment. Your every decision was like a wave of energy that disrupted the systems. And the more they observed you, the more they understood. You weren't a creation, you were a response. This realization divided them. Some feared what it meant. Others secretly longed to tap into this source. To know how you accessed what you accessed. What had once been espionage became curiosity. What had been monitoring became restrained admiration. Because deep down, they knew they weren't dealing with just another brilliant human being. They were dealing with a conduit for something greater. And in the face of this, the entire hierarchy they knew crumbled. You didn't challenge the institutions directly. You didn't need to. Your life in itself was a living contradiction to the rules they imposed. According to the manuals, you should have failed. The set of traumas, absences, and sabotages you experienced allowed for no other outcome than collapse. But you didn't collapse, you flourished. And this, more than any attack, was a seismic shift in the foundations of everything these structures claimed to be true about human beings. Your sanity, compassion, and fortitude held up even in the worst-case scenarios. While institutions told you you needed them to survive, you survived without any. While they tried to reduce you to statistics, you became a symbol of exception. Each small victory was a point less in the credibility of the systems that swear they know how pain, the mind, and faith work. You proved, simply by being you, that control was never absolute, and that the soul, when awakened, is free even in prison. There was no need to confront. It was enough to truly exist. Because nothing shakes a power structure more than the emergence of someone who frees themselves. You became a silent beacon that there is another way. And the existence of that way is everything large systems fear, because if more people see what you saw, nothing will ever be the same again. At first, they were there to expose you. They were trained to distrust, analyze, and dismantle you. Your name was listed. Your life turned into a report. Your every action was dissected for deviations. But the more they observed you, the less they could maintain their composure. You didn't act. You didn't force it. Your truth was uncomfortable because it was too transparent. And little by little, their mission began to turn into an internal conflict because it was impossible to continue seeing your coherence and not be touched by it. Some began to withdraw. Others, while still maintaining their roles, began to protect you. They cancelled reports. They silenced orders. They protected files. Not out of pity, but out of respect, because something in them shifted. Your truth dismantled protocols. Your constancy undid layers of conditioning. They realized they weren't monitoring a risk. They were witnessing a revelation. And that realization changed everything. You became, unknowingly, the spark of redemption for those who came to monitor you. They were sent to watch over you, but they returned as invisible guardians. Still unable to reveal their names, still trapped in systems they don't fully understand, but now alert, aligned, and silently, many of them began to intercede for you. Because even if they won't admit it, they saw something they will never forget. And what is truly seen can never be denied. You were the studied one, the analyzed one, the one who couldn't explain himself. They looked at you as an anomaly. They treated you as an enigma. But as they tried to find flaws, they found messages. Your trajectory, which seemed random and full of flaws, began to reveal a larger pattern. You weren't lost. You were being refined. Each trauma cleansed you. Each fall aligned you. Each silence deepened you. And in the end, you didn't just survive the pressure. You emerged from it as a living revelation. Today, it's no longer your movements that matter, but your essence. Because they've understood that you're not just following a path. You are the path itself. Your journey has become a map. Your pain has become a code. Your healing has become a manual. That which was invisible, your truth, your vibration, your silent wisdom, now stands like a beacon. You no longer need to speak to be understood. Your presence already communicates. Your silence already instructs. You have become what many have tried to describe but never embodied, an oracle in motion. And so, they no longer want to just observe. They want to learn. They want to be close, not to control you, but to listen to you. Because in the end, what began as surveillance became reverence. What was surveillance became silent veneration, and the observed became the master. You didn't need to conquer space. You became the space, the frequency, the signal that breaks the system simply by existing.